It was supposed to be an ordinary night at the amusement park. The air was heavy with the smell of fried food and burnt sugar. Music from the carousel drifted faintly across the midway, and the neon lights buzzed like insects in the summer heat. The crowd had thinned. Families were leaving with tired children. Teenagers were buying last-minute snacks, and employees were cleaning up for the night. That's when I saw it. The Steel Serpent, the park's tallest roller coaster, still stood lit against the night sky. The line was gone, the entrance gate left open, and one lone attendant leaned against the railing, watching. "You're just in time," he called when he saw me. His voice carried too far, too sharp for the quiet park. "Last ride of the night." His grin stretched wide, a little too wide. My instincts told me to walk away, but something about the emptiness, the promise of having the ride all to myself, made me step forward. The restraints locked across my chest with a metallic snap that felt final. The ride lurched forward, chain pulling me into the dark sky, the click, click, click echoing louder than it should have. At first it felt normal, the plunge, the loops, the rush of air. But when I looked down, the world had changed. The park below was gone. No music, no lights, no voices, just black nothingness stretching out in every direction. The coaster roared back into the station. Relief flooded me, until the wheels screamed, sparks flying, as the train blew straight through without stopping. We climbed again, higher this time. The air was colder, the stars overhead unfamiliar, shifting like smudges on glass. I tugged at the restraints, but they were locked too tight. My heart pounded as we plunged again, but the track was different, impossible. Twisting in directions that defied gravity, leading us into a tunnel I knew had never existed. The walls were stone, carved with deep scratches, handprints pressed into the surface like people had clawed to escape. And in the reflection of the steel, I saw faces, dozens of them, screaming silently as we shot past. I wasn't alone anymore. I turned, and every seat behind me was filled. People, or things that had once been people, screaming, writhing, their bodies twisted at impossible angles. Some leaned forward, their hands brushing my shoulders, whispering into my ears in voices that weren't human. The ride grew faster. The tracks bent, forming ahead of us from thin air, carrying us through landscapes that weren't real. The sky turned crimson, then pitch black, then a swirling mass of colors that hurt to look at. And then I saw him, the attendant. He was sitting in the front car now, grinning, his teeth too sharp, his eyes glowing. "You wanted the last ride," he bellowed over the roar. "And the last ride is forever." The coaster dropped. Down, down into a fall that never ended. My stomach turned inside out, my vision blurred, and the screams around me grew deafening. I blacked out. When I woke, I was back in the station. Morning light filtered through the glass. The park was bustling again. Families, kids, music, laughter. I stumbled off the ride, shaking, pale, and no one looked twice. I told myself it had been a nightmare, a hallucination. But that night, when I tried to sleep, I felt the restraints lock across my chest again, heard the chain pulling me higher, smelled the rust and oil of the tracks. And every night since then, when I close my eyes, the ride starts again. Because once you board the ride that never ended, you never get off. Theme parks are built to be happy places. Lights, music, laughter. You're supposed to feel safe. That's why the mascots are always there. Smiling animals, waving characters, symbols of joy. They're not meant to frighten you. But sometimes they do. The first time I noticed him was at the edge of the midway. The crowd was thinning, rides were shutting down, and the park speakers announced the closing hour. But Sonny the Bear, the park's official mascot, was still standing there. His oversized bear head tilted just slightly, round eyes staring too directly at me. At first, I smiled and waved, because that's what you're supposed to do. He waved back, slowly, almost stiffly, and I walked on. But then, I saw him again, near the carousel. Kids had already gone home, parents tugging them toward the exits. Yet there he was, standing between two horses, unmoving. The other mascots were gone, but Sonny stayed, watching. I felt uneasy, but I brushed it off. Maybe he was one of those workers who took his role too seriously. But when I reached the food stands, there he was again, 100 yards behind me, same pose, same tilt of the head. By the time I got to the gates, the park was nearly deserted. The ride stood in silence, lights flickering, music warped by the wind. I turned back one last time, and there he was. At the far end of the midway, in the shadows, one gloved hand raised in a slow, deliberate wave. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about his stillness, the way he seemed to appear no matter where I turned. At 3 a.m., I woke to a sound in the hall outside my bedroom. Thud, thud, thud. Slow, padded footsteps like oversized shoes dragging along the floor. Then came a knock on my door, too soft, too deliberate, the sound of gloved hands tapping gently against wood. When I finally worked up the courage to open it, the hallway was empty. But at the far end, just before the corner, I thought I saw something retreating. A huge, round shadow brushing the ceiling. The next morning, I tried to laugh it off. Stress. Dreams. But then I saw something on my porch. A yellow bow tie. The exact kind Sonny wore. Weeks passed. I avoided the park. I told myself I was fine. But one night while driving home, my headlights lit up the trees by the road. And I saw him. A massive figure, head too large, eyes too dark, standing just beyond the tree line. His gloved hand raised in that same slow wave. I drove faster, heart slamming, until I reached my house. My porch light flickered on, and there he was, Sonny the bear, standing just outside the circle of light, watching. This time, I saw his face more clearly. The stitched smile stretched too wide, and behind it, rows of sharp, jagged teeth. His head tilted back as if laughing, though no sound came out. I ran inside, locked every bolt, turned out every light. For nights, nothing happened. I began to think maybe it was over. But then I noticed him again, at the end of my street, in the reflection of a store window. Once I saw him standing on the opposite train platform, perfectly still as the train rushed past. He doesn't follow me every night, but I know he's there, waiting, because once Sonny the bear notices you, he never leaves. Kyle, Marissa, and Jonah had grown up hearing whispers about Wonder Springs Amusement Park. Once the pride of the town, it had been shut down in 1997 after a roller coaster accident killed several riders. Since then, the park had rotted away behind rusted gates and overgrown fences. But locals swore the rides never stopped, even without power. That scream still echoed through the night if you stood close enough to the gates. On a humid summer night, the three friends decided to test the legend. Armed with flashlights and a half-empty bottle of whiskey, they climbed through a hole in the fence. Immediately, they noticed how wrong the air felt. The silence was suffocating, as if the insects and wind had abandoned the place. Only the faint metallic groan of the Ferris wheel broke the stillness. They walked deeper, past cotton candy stands collapsing into themselves, their paint peeling like dead skin. Marissa froze when she noticed the ticket booth lights flickering, though the wires had long been cut. Inside the booth, a stack of torn tickets sat neatly as if waiting for customers. Jonah laughed nervously, calling it a prank left by teenagers, but his voice trembled. When they reached the roller coaster, the tracks were warped and jagged. twisted into unnatural shapes. The coaster cars sat in the station, perfectly lined up, their safety bars locked open. Kyle touched one of the seats. It was warm. Suddenly, the chain lift clanked to life, the sound echoing through the empty park. The cars lurched forward, rolling onto the track. None of them had pressed anything, and there was no power supply. Yet the train climbed, click by click, into the darkness above. As it reached the peak, the friends heard screams, not echoes, but fresh, blood-curdling screams of riders. Marissa swore she saw silhouettes in the cars, thrashing, hands gripping the rails. The train plummeted down the rusted track, and the sound of bones snapping and metal tearing filled the night. When they blinked, the cars were back in the station, spotless and empty, as if nothing had happened. Terrified, they tried to leave, but the midway stretched endlessly. No matter which way they turned, the gates were gone, replaced by more rides. The carousel spun slowly, its horses moving up and down on their poles, though their painted eyes seemed alive, tracking them. Jonah shouted that they were trapped, and that's when they heard footsteps, dozens of them, approaching in sync. Figures emerged from the shadows, children holding balloons, parents with ice cream cones, all with faces blurred and smudged like melted wax. The crowd surrounded them silently. Kyle tried to push through but stumbled into one of the figures, whose head twisted unnaturally to face him. Its jaw cracked open wider than any human jaw could, releasing the same high-pitched scream they'd heard on the roller coaster. In seconds, the entire crowd screamed in unison, a wall of sound that rattled the ground beneath their feet. Marissa dropped her flashlight, and as its beam swept across the cracked pavement, she realized something horrifying. The shadows on the ground didn't match the figures. They matched Kyle, Jonah, and herself. 3 human shadows, stretched and distorted, writhing as if being torn apart. She looked up, and the figures were gone. Only the empty park remained. The 3 finally stumbled back through the hole in the fence just before sunrise. When they turned around, the Ferris wheel had stopped moving, and the gates stood sealed with chains. None of them spoke about it for weeks, but each woke in the night to the same sound, roller coaster chains clanking outside their window. And one by one, each of them vanished before summer's end. If you made it this far, thank you for spending your night with us. If these stories gave you chills, there's plenty more waiting. Don't forget to subscribe to Night Fear Stories for new terrifying tales every single night. Sleep well, if you can.